China is throwing its weight around again against Australia, of course. It hasn't taken too kindly to an Australian politician briefing European politicians about how we've stood up to Beijing. Liberal Senator and Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, James Paterson, last week briefed the European Parliament about our Foreign Relations Act. It's always been mainly about China, this act, but the government's been coy about naming that nation until this speech.
Further, it empowers the federal government to ultimately terminate arrangements it deems to be inconsistent with Australia's foreign policy or may adversely impact Australia's foreign relations. This is aimed at countering a strategy by authoritarian states, most notably China with its Belt and Road deal, to seek to divide us internally between different levels of government.
Now, China has responded to this speech by having its embassy complain to our parliament about the senator's, quote, hostility. That's some sort of an own goal, isn't it? Accused of interfering in our democracy, China complains to our parliament, effectively trying to silence one of our senators, thereby proving that very point. Senator James Paterson joins me now. Thanks for joining us, Senator. China's trying to interfere in our democracy by having you silenced now.
Chris, I think you and the Prime Minister both enjoyed that irony today, as he said when he was asked about it. It's quite an ironic way to complain if you are being accused of intervening in someone else's democracy. I actually thought that my observations were fairly mild and factual, but perhaps what concerns the Chinese embassy the most is that the European Parliament is taking Australia's advice very seriously. They're very familiar with our circumstances. They're very interested to hear about what we've done to address it. And they're looking very closely at implementing a number of the things that we've implemented over the last few years, in particular, whether they should legislate for a similar style foreign influence transparency scheme, which we legislated in 2018.
Yeah, I think that's the fascinating thing about it, not just what you told the Europeans, but they wanted to hear this because they're looking at dealing with similar issues. Are they having similar problems unfold in their own countries?
Virtually identical, Chris. Authoritarian states, in the case of Europe, China, but also Russia and others, are seeking to divide them internally, to weaken them internally, and to take advantage of our great strength as open societies, as free societies, but which authoritarian societies see as a weakness, which is our willingness to tolerate diverse points of view and open and free debate, and to have a contest of ideas where it's perfectly acceptable to argue anything you wish. All that we've done in return is to seek to underpin those values, protect those values, by requiring transparency from those who participate in those public debates. You can, in this country, argue on behalf of the interests of a foreign government. You can even be paid by a foreign government to do so, but you just can't do it covertly. You have to be open and honest and transparent and declare it. And if you do, people can take into account your point of view accordingly.
Now, tell us about this letter from the Chinese embassy trying to shut you down, a letter to the Parliament. What's the process there? There's nothing that could or should flow from that, is there?
No, thankfully, our Parliament has no power to regulate the individual actions and speeches of individual parliamentarians, and that's a very good thing, and nor should we ever give the Parliament that power. So it's a futile complaint in that sense, and perhaps it indicates a misunderstanding of the Australian parliamentary system, or perhaps it's the embassy in China, of China in Canberra, seeking to do what it assumes its masters in Beijing would want it to do, which is object strongly when there is any criticism of the Chinese government.
Yeah, it would be a great problem, of course, if there was something wrong with an Australian politician telling the European politicians about what we're doing in this country to deal with similar issues. As you mentioned, the Prime Minister responded on this today. Let's have a look at what Scott Morrison said.
Well, I'm not going to sell out Australia's free speech. It's never going to happen. Australia is a free country where you can speak your mind, and under our government, you can be very sure that will be retained and always stood up for in whatever forum is necessary.
That is good to see and makes a lot of sense. I just want to get your thoughts on another foreign policy related issue because it's come up today, Senator, and that is what we've seen in the last 24 hours in Kabul, a parade by the Taliban asserting their military authority, I suppose, parading equipment that was captured from the Americans, armoured personnel carriers that we can see on screen now that were made by the Americans, and Russian helicopters as well. Can you just tell us what this tells us about what's going on in Afghanistan and what's going to unfold from here?
Chris, unfortunately, many of the fears that we all held following the US-led withdrawal from Afghanistan have been realised, which is the Taliban have very quickly consolidated control, and that they are using and appear to intend to use that to very much exert themselves over the population of Afghanistan. And I suspect that this parade is intended to send a message to the people of Afghanistan that if you resist Taliban rule, that there'll be very serious consequences for you, and that they've got the ability to do so. That is a very unfortunate thing. That is a very sad thing for the people of Afghanistan, who have suffered under 20 years of war, and before that, decades of Taliban rule, and unfortunately are back under that rule again.
Senator, thanks so much for joining us again today.
Pleasure, Chris. Thank you.